Black Friday fails to boost falling gun sales. Plus, gun rights groups hail the creation of a new Second Amendment division at the DOJ. And we hear from a Reload member. All this and more on the news update.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the news update. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogelman, joined as always by Reload founder Steve Witkowski. TheReload.com, of course, is where you can head on over today to sign up for our free weekly newsletter. We'll keep you up to date on all things happening in the world of gun politics and policy. The big story we want to kick things off with this week is the updated gun sales figures that we got coming on the heels of Black Friday, which tends to be, like most consumer goods, tends to be a big day for shopping and purchasing. But this year, at least for the gun industry, it wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. It's tends to be the biggest gun sales day of the year or week, really, as Black Friday has kind of morphed into over time, right? Most people don't do the doorbuster insanity of the 90s, 2000s Black Friday anymore. And a lot of places spread out those sales across several weeks and makes the whole thing a bit more anticlimactic now, which is maybe good, maybe bad. It depends on, I don't know, the deals are as good as they used to be either, but regardless, it does still tend to be the top sales week of the year, and the Friday tends to be the top sales day. Although I think this year it's the Saturday had more NICS checks, and this is going to be a fun one to explain because, normally when we talk about gun sales numbers, we're not actually talking about literal one-to-one representations, right? Because that's not a thing that exists. There's no national gun registry in the United States. There is no way to track every single gun sale that happens. Some states have registries like California, but most of them don't. And the federal government, in fact, makes it illegal for the feds to have a gun registry. So instead, you have to rely on other metrics, and the most reliable one tends to be the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System numbers, the report that the FBI puts out. Of course, the problem with the FBI's report with their raw numbers is that they include all kinds of things that aren't actually related to gun sales. Usually they include gun carry permit checks, because most states will have you go through a NICS check in order to obtain your concealed carry license, for instance. And so that actually skews the raw numbers. And so we usually use, and what we will use in this report here for overall November numbers, the National Shooting Sports Foundation's analysis of the NICS report. National Shooting Sports Foundation, for those who don't know, is the industry's trade group. They put on SHOT Show every year where all the gun companies show off their latest goods, and they represent the industry. They're the actual gun lobby. There is a real literal gun company lobby. The NRA is not actually the gun lobby. While it does have connections to the gun industry, certainly, and gun companies do donate to the NRA, it is a membership organization that raises most of its funds from its actual members. But regardless, all that to say that the Black Friday numbers we have are actually raw numbers, because NSSF, the FBI doesn't put out the codes for individual checks for the week of Black Friday. They just kind of give you the numbers that they did through NICS. And so we're kind of dealing with two different measures, but they tell the same story, frankly. The Black Friday numbers are down. NICS check numbers are down. I think they were down something like 13.5%, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head here. And that's from just last year, 2024. 13.6%. So there's about 530,000 NICS checks during the Black Friday week, which is down about 80,000 from last year, which is about 13.6%. And then actual Black Friday saw about 165,000 NICS checks conducted by the FBI, and that's down from the all-time record, which was set in 2023, which was 214, nearly 215,000. So, it's still a lot of gun sales, certainly, but not nearly as many as we've seen even in recent history. And the story continued down the same path for the overall numbers in November, which were down about 7% year over year. And, if you look at the chart that the NSSF has been tracking this, they've been doing this analysis for, since 2012, I think. And so they've been doing it for years. And what you can see is that in fact, their graph goes all the way back to 2000. So 25 years worth of data that they've publicly released here. And last November was not only the worst of the post-pandemic months, but is now below several pre-pandemic years. Post-pandemic Novembers, and it's actually even below several pre-pandemic Novembers. So, it just tells the overall story, and it's not a fluke. It's not a one-off happening either. This has been a trend we've seen where sales, as represented by these NSSF adjusted NICS checks numbers, are in decline, and they've been in decline for half a decade now, since that huge surge we saw in 2020 around the pandemic and around the rioting that occurred in 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. And there were all these numerous reasons why all kinds of people from all kinds of different backgrounds and who live in all sorts of places would want to go out and buy a gun. And it created this perfect storm of gun buying in 2020. And ever since then, the market has been readjusting downward, which is not unusual. That's how the gun market tends to operate. It tends to have busts and booms, and you'll get cycles. And a lot of it is driven by politics, which we'll get into in a minute. Still seems to be the case, at least to some degree here, and we'll discuss why in a second. But this boom bust cycle, this is the biggest boom ever, and now it's leading to a more prolonged bust cycle, you could call it. Now, many of those post-pandemic years were still well above the pre-pandemic years, so bust is maybe a strong term for it. But we haven't seen the market come to a new floor. We've been talking about this for years at this point. Where is the new floor after that spike? And it still hasn't arrived.
Yeah, no, it's a continued slide. Like you said, it's a trend we've been observing for a while now. And it just goes to show that things that even, in past years kind of arrested that slide, at least temporarily, aren't doing it anymore. The Black Friday, clearly, like we said, in 2023, that was the all-time Black Friday record, even though 2023 overall was starting to experience some of that post-pandemic slide. And this year, even that wasn't enough to juice things. Like you said, it does seem like locationally, there are still factors that are juicing gun sales. And you dove into some numbers in Virginia, for instance, where politics do seem to have had a very real impact on gun sales, because we saw Virginia skyrocket in terms of where gun sales were happening nationwide.
Yeah, that was another thing that was clear from this most recent reporting. These new numbers from NSSF on November's market report. Virginia was a standout, and I think it's fairly obvious why. Right, Virginia is one of the states that had an off-year election this year in November, and we saw Democrats sweep to control of the state governments. They took back the gubernatorial mansion. They already had control of the Senate and House, but they significantly expanded their control of the House. And so it was a bit of a landslide victory, as we've discussed before, in the aftermath of that. And it seems clear that Virginians, at least some Virginians, have responded by going out and buying guns, because I think the writing is clearly on the wall. Democrats have controlled the state legislature here for a couple of years. I live in Virginia, for those who don't know. But the Democrats have controlled the legislature here for several years, while Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor, has vetoed dozens of gun control bills during that time. And so the expectation, I think, among pretty much everybody, right? While even though, it hasn't been the top of the agenda necessarily for Democrats in the wake of the election, it's not something that they've put their emphasis on, but it's I think everyone expects that they're going to pass most of those gun control bills through the legislature, and that Abigail Spanberger, the elected or the governor-elect, the Democrat here in Virginia, is likely to sign them all in a reversal of what Youngkin had done for several years. So it sure seems that people recognize this and are responding by going to their local gun store and buying guns at a much higher rate than normal. This is the first time this year, as far as I have seen in these reports from NSSF, that Virginia has made it into the top 5 for overall gun sales related NICS checks and for long gun checks. And long gun checks makes particular sense because one of the things that's likely to pass here in Virginia is an assault weapons ban. Now, that is something that last time Democrats had control of the state, full control of the state government, they failed to pass an assault weapons ban. They did pass a number of other policies like universal background checks and red flag laws, but so there's some possibility they might not get it through, but the state legislature has been passing assault weapons bans here. So it's more likely than not that that's going to come. And it seems people are responding to it perhaps by buying the guns that are going to be targeted, things like AR-15s. Those are long guns, of course. FBI data does not give you that sort of granular breakdown of exactly what kind of guns are being bought, but it seems likely that's what's driving those numbers up. Virginia is only the 12th most populous state, which is actually higher than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. But yeah, so it's punching well above its weight right in November in terms of gun buying as compared to the rest of the country. And it seems pretty straightforward that that's very likely a response to this election and what's likely to come down the line through legislation in Virginia. So it shows, as Colorado, your home state, did earlier this year, back in May, that politics can still generate a response from gun owners in the form of certainly of gun buying. Colorado, of course, passed its permit to purchase law for so-called assault weapons, AR-15s and similar firearms. And in response, Colorado, which is, I was surprised to learn this as well, only the 21st most populous state, jumped into the top 5 in gun sales related NICS checks briefly back during that period. So people certainly seem to still be responding to these pressures, but maybe not in the way that gun rights activists would like to see, because most of the response appears to be coming in the aftermath of the election, and rather than getting people to turn out to vote for pro-gun candidates, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the takeaways that I would see in this whole thing. Right. I mean, that's one thing I think gun rights advocates should worry about. Like, clearly this effect still happens. People still notice and respond to potential new gun restrictions by going out and buying guns after it becomes clear they're very likely to become law. But that same effect has not helped Republicans, who are the pro-gun party, so to speak, generally speaking, right, to avoid electoral defeats, and it hasn't helped to galvanize moderate Democrats to not vote for these sorts of bans. So that's a problem, right?
Yeah, no, it's something we've talked about, many times before. Just one of the perils of gun rights becoming polarized, and frankly, any interest becoming directly polarized and being reliant almost wholly on one single party, because your political fortunes rise and fall with the political fortunes of that party overall. And so when you have an election cycle like this off-year election cycle that we just had, where Republicans took it on the chin just about everywhere they were on the ballot, that means that gun rights tend to fall by the wayside as well in those instances. And like you said, then the gun buying becomes a lagging indicator of the political reality rather than a leading thing that shows that people are turning out to the polls to prevent, a bad gun control wave from happening or whatever, what have you. So it's a fallout, I think, from the continued polarization of the gun issue between the two parties, is that this is what you get.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about this a lot on the show in the past. Is this idea of how dangerous polarization can be for your issue, because especially with guns, where guns tend to be gun politics tend to be a low salience issue most of the time, or middle salience. They may not be the very lowest ranking in most polls of what voters prioritize, but they tend to be somewhere in the middle, on the lower end of the middle, I would say too. Unless there's something that brings, usually a mass shooting, frankly, or a major mass shooting, that brings the salience up a lot. And so, when your issue is both polarized and low salience, that means you're going to have a lot of election cycles where the fate of gun policy is not going to be dependent on what the voters actually think about gun policy. It'll be more dependent on whatever the leading issue of that campaign is, and whether or not the party that is aligned with your issue is winning on those issues as well. Right. And clearly, like, because Virginia 2025 elections in Virginia were not about gun policy. They just weren't. Was not the top issue anywhere in the state. It may become a leading issue if Democrats push really hard on gun bans. Obviously, we saw a lot of grassroots opposition the last time this aired. One of the reasons they did not pass an assault weapons ban back when Democrats controlled both the governorship and the state house, is because there was a lot of grassroots backlash to the idea. There was a whole Second Amendment sanctuary movement at the time, so they gun rights advocates were able to effectively organize and turn out people after after the state elections that time, and that did matter, and that's still something that could happen this time as well, around as well too. Although the margins are the political dynamics are certainly different now than they were, 5-6 years ago. But regardless, yeah, this is one of the problems that you face when your political movement is tied up in a single party. And we've discussed this before too, that that isn't even necessarily something that you can completely avoid on your own. And I think we've argued that. Certainly, I've argued that it's been a bit of a push-pull thing with gun rights advocates in the Republican Party, where Democrats there have been fewer viable pro-gun Democrat candidates out there for gun rights advocates to rally around and back. I think the NRA endorsed a single Democrat last election, right? But at the same time, there's also been a conscious effort to ingratiate the gun rights movement with the Republican Party, and mesh them more closely at the same time, especially with Donald Trump and the NRA, right? There's been at times as though the NRA or other gun rights groups are in an arm of the Republican Party or the Donald Trump political operation. So, I think it isn't all one or the other, but it's kind of a combination of both. Democrats have become less open to pro-gun candidates. The Democratic voters seem to have made that, especially primary voters, made that adjustment. And the gun rights movement has responded in large part by getting closer to the Republican Party, who has courted them as well. But this is what happens when you are in a highly polarized political environment and your issue is only championed by one side of that divide, and your issue is not the top issue in most elections. It's going to be, you're going to have times where what you do isn't going to have much an effect. And I will say too, like, to jump into the top 5 in gun sales only requires a swing of maybe tens of thousands of sales, right? Whereas to have a major impact on a statewide election in a state with, I think it's 9 million or so residents in Virginia, you need more than 10,000, 20,000 vote swing in a lot of, not in every race, of course, but that sort of swing, even if the people who went out and bought guns in response to the Virginia elections all did vote for Republicans in those elections. It may not have made a difference because there's just not enough people there. So I do want to comment on that, on the numbers at play there. Like, to jump into the top 5 in the nation in gun sales, or at least in gun sales related NICS checks, probably takes less raw number movement than to have a major impact on the Virginia gubernatorial election, right? So just should note that as well. But I think it does say a lot that not only did the Virginia, not only did Abigail Spanberger win by, I think it was 14 points, which is a lot in Virginia. The Democrats swept like 13 House seats. They flipped like 13 seats, which is very unusual for the last several cycles in Virginia, where the House and Senate have been, 1 or 2 vote majorities in either direction. Like, you don't usually see a swing that dramatic. So I don't know how much, it's just, I think either gun owners were not motivated to vote on that issue alone, or there just weren't enough of them to overcome the wave of support for Democrats, largely on other issues.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And this is an issue, of course, we're going to stay on top of, both the overall macro trends in the firearms industry and the continuous slide in sales, but also how politics interacts with that. Because, of course, our next big test for this dynamic will be coming up here shortly in the 2026 midterms. And so we'll be watching to see what happens there, certainly. But outside of gun sales, we had an interesting story about kind of a weird story, quite frankly. We had reports that the Department of Justice had plans to, within its Civil Rights Division, open up a brand new dedicated Second Amendment section that would be focused entirely on continuing to investigate and superintend what the office sees as perceived infringements on the right to bear arms in states and localities. And we saw, this was first reported by Reuters, and we started to see a lot of praise, naturally, from their allies in the gun rights movement, both the National Shooting Sports Foundation and the NRA and then Firearms Policy Coalition, celebrating this idea. But we haven't seen too much of a formal announcement from the DOJ since that, which is a little bit strange.
And they haven't responded to your requests for comment on this, right? They haven't changed their website. The reporting from Reuters indicates that this new section of the office was supposed to open yesterday, on Thursday. I don't see any reason to doubt Reuters reporting here. They are going off of a document that was sent from DOJ to Congress that they obtained. We haven't been able to get a copy of that letter. I have heard from source with knowledge that there was a briefing from the Department of Justice to Senate staffers yesterday on this change. It is something that the DOJ can do on its own, doesn't require congressional action. They have to inform Congress when they're reorganizing things in this way, but they don't need permission from them. So it's certainly something that DOJ, it appears, can do. And it obviously would be in line with some of the public actions they have taken, like the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department investigation and lawsuit, and some of the other moves which we'll discuss in a second. But it's definitely an odd thing. You're seeing their allies in the gun rights movement come out and praise the action, but all the praise is based off of them saying, we read this Reuters report and it said this is going to happen. It's not based off of them saying the administration has told us this is happening, or they're not claiming to have any particular knowledge of this beyond what's in the Reuters report. They're just reacting to the Reuters report, which, again, we don't see any reason to doubt the Reuters report. It's just odd that the DOJ is being so mum on this, when it certainly seems like something they might want to get attention for, at least. And the idea might be just to get attention from this is something that can happen. I mean, we've experienced this at times. where politicians or government agencies might want certain people to be aware of a development that happened, but not make a big public showing of it. I've had governors whose their offices have reached out for us to do stories on them signing, a law into effect, a pro-gun law, but not announcing this publicly, not putting out a press release about it. But they want coverage in certain outlets. That makes sense. Ron DeSantis did that. I remember his office reaching out for us to cover the fact that he signed a bill, even though that they didn't go and put out a press release from the official governor's office, and it's not something I think that's unique to Ron DeSantis by any means, but this is something you'll see agencies or politicians do, where they want just a specific faction of people to know this is happening, and so they'll maybe tell them or leak that this is going on without making a big public show. But this seems a little bit of an odd scenario for that to be the case, though, because you're creating a whole section in the Civil Rights Division, which is one of the divisions that's been under the most scrutiny, I think, during the Trump administration, because they've made significant changes to how it operates, and reprioritized operations to at least some degree by doing things like these Second Amendment cases, and dropping other traditional focuses of the office, like police department, race discrimination investigations, and consent decrees and things like that. But not that they've stopped doing that altogether, but it's certainly been something they've come under a lot of scrutiny for how they're handling those operations. But yeah, so anyway, like, it sort of seems like this is a thing that's happening, but that the DOJ just doesn't want to talk about.
Yeah, for whatever reason, like you said, it does seem like something that they would want to get some shine for. They haven't been shy in the past, for instance, when doing other ostensibly pro Second Amendment actions. But Attorney General Pam Bondi, of course, puts out press releases all the time announcing the Second Amendment task force, announcing the first lawsuit, as you mentioned, against the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department over concealed carry permits. And so it is a bit strange. Like you said, I tried to follow up and chase down this story from the DOJ's mouth specifically, and got radio silence in response. And we'll have to see. It does seem to have, like you said, just the reports of this happening in and of itself does seem to have gone a long way in getting some shine from the gun rights movement, naturally, as the news would.
Understandably.
Which is probably useful for the administration, because as we reported, there's been a little bit of tension between the DOJ and at least some figures in the gun rights movement over the last few months, just because the DOJ has, while it has, gone after these localities and done things that gun rights advocates have liked, at the federal level, they've really opposed a lot of the gun rights movement's priorities and prerogatives in lawsuits, and trying to narrow rulings or defending laws that the gun rights people think are obviously unconstitutional. And
like
they
the National
the
Firearms Act, there have been a number
Right.
of lawsuits there where the DOJ has continued to defend the constitutionality of that law, to the consternation of a number of these groups. So yeah, it certainly does seem like something where they'd want to, perhaps they want to throw a bone to these groups. And I don't want to minimize it too much, right? This is something we haven't seen the DOJ doing these sorts of Now, I will say it's not really the first time. It's more like the first time in like 150 years, as people forget this. But the DOJ did actually try to uphold the Second Amendment rights of citizens from state infringements back during Reconstruction. It's sort of a sad history of ours, part of our, perhaps a more negative aspect of our American history. But after the Civil War, the DOJ did try to use Second Amendment arguments in a number of cases against really the massacre of Black citizens in the South. The most famous cases being Cruikshanks, where there was a race riot, a massacre of a number of Black people. And one of the arguments the DOJ used at the time was that the rioters who killed these people were infringing their civil rights and in part their Second Amendment rights. That was part of there, but of course the Supreme Court actually shot that down. That's where we got honestly a lot of the that's where the idea came that the Second Amendment only restricts the federal government and not state governments. It really was formed primarily out of that decision, which was one of the holdings in Cruikshanks. Obviously, something that the Supreme Court has worked back on since then in recent times. Essentially incorporating the Second Amendment through the 14th Amendment. Although, if you go back to the abolitionists pre-Civil War, they argued that the Second Amendment applied against state regulations as well. But anyway, enough of my very cliff-noted history lesson there. The point is, DOJ actually did used to do some Second Amendment litigation against state and even individual actors during Reconstruction. They stopped doing that for about the last 150 years. And so this is sort of not a first of its kind. It's first of its kind in some of the particulars of how they're going about, like this Los Angeles suit, but it's not the first time DOJ has tried to uphold Second Amendment rights of individuals through litigation. But it is significant that they're making some of these moves. They're getting involved in some of these cases. They're arguing, even at the Supreme Court on the side of gun rights plaintiffs. In Wolford, for instance, the Hawaii case about gun carry. But, I guess the question becomes, especially with how they've handled the rollout of this new section, like how many resources are they actually going to put into this? Again, I don't want to minimize. I don't want to say they're not doing anything, but this is one investigation and lawsuit that they filed themselves. They've basically done amicus briefs in these other cases, which is not exactly a high intensive operation. They've sent out some letters to other jurisdictions, basically warning that they're investigating them as well. And so I guess the question, we'll have to see. We don't know yet, and perhaps this is the prelude to them doing more of this down the line. But is this going to be a more serious part of the Civil Rights Division, or is it going to be sort of one-off? Every once in a while they throw one of these cases out there. That's the question that this all raises for me, because the Reuters report indicated that they're not getting any new funding for this, that they're going to use current resources, which could again cause some backlash and criticism if they're diverting from other purposes, but also presumably would limit exactly how much they could really do here. So that's one thing that remains to be seen. The one thing that we'll watch is this is a significant move by the Department of Justice that has already drawn, as you mentioned, praise from the gun rights advocates. The question just becomes now, how much do they follow through on it? What do they actually accomplish with it?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And we'll, of course, report once we learn more. We'll make sure that Reload listeners learn more as well. Last story of ours that we want to touch on just briefly is an interesting, also related to the federal government and its relation to the Second Amendment. The feds at the Department of Education granted a close to $1 million grant to the University of Wyoming's Firearms Research Center to craft and disseminate a Second Amendment curriculum for schools.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is going to be for, it appears, K through 12 students across the country. Basically a civics and history class about the Second Amendment, and that seems to focus largely on the creation of the Second Amendment, and then secondarily on the various interpretations of the amendment over the years, and as well as the civic implications of the Second Amendment. So it's another notable move from the Trump administration that I think is likely to make gun rights advocates happy, because, I think they just appreciate the effort to teach the Second Amendment's history in civics courses around the country, and two, the academic entity that they picked here is one that has scholars that tend to take a more expansive view of the Second Amendment. Right, we're actually going to have Ashley Hablinski on the show this week, so we're not going to get too deep into all this right now, but we'll get more in depth during the interview podcast. But she is the former curator of the Cody Firearms Museum in Wyoming. David Kopel, your colleague at Independence Institute, who we've had on the show a bunch of times, he's a senior fellow at the Firearms Research Center. He's obviously been one of the key figures in the development of the standard model, as it's called, in the federal court system for interpretation of the Second Amendment, which takes an individualist view of the Second Amendment. And so, there's a lot of, there's an academically rigorous institution, but also one that where most of the scholars, I think, take an expansive view of the amendment's protections. And whereas you can look at, it's very similar in my mind to Duke University's Firearms Law Center, which, but kind of the inverse of it, academically rigorous, but they tend to have scholars that take a more restrictive view of the Second Amendment and the protections it offers. And so, or, Johns Hopkins Medical School also has the Gun Violence Prevention Center. And again, they take a much more restrictive view of what the Second Amendment protects, and a much more expansive view of how much the government should regulate firearms. But, interestingly, if you read the release and you read what Ashley and George McSherry, who's a law professor that also helps direct the Firearms Research Center, they emphasize that, the goal of the program is not to, teach the individualist view necessarily as something that the goal is not to indoctrinate, is I think the point they try to get across, and the goal is more to provide teachers with access to primary sources from the creation of the Second Amendment through modern day, and then also that they're going to have access to resources and seminars from scholars that have a wide variety of views on the Second Amendment. So incorporating the debate over the Second Amendment is going to be a part, at least from what they've said in their press release, is going to be a significant part of what this class does. So obviously we don't have the course load or anything like that. Doesn't appear to have been, is not available yet. They just got this grant. But that's what they're going to be developing. But we'll talk with Ashley more details about it, but it's certainly an interesting, significant development, especially if it does make it into like a nationwide classes on the Second Amendment. That'll be a pretty significant thing. It's something we haven't seen done before, as far as I'm aware, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. But Reload members can check out that interview podcast on Sunday, and it'll be available for everyone else on Monday. So they should definitely check that out if they want to learn more. Getting into some of our newsletter links from outside the Reload this week, we had an interesting one from the AP about another trend that we've kind of identified as of late, but talking about the pretty stark decline in what they call mass killings, but it's all related to the general decline in crime, violent crime, as well as mass shootings. Then they use obviously the AP tracker works with Professor James Allen Fox, who we've had on the show to talk about mass killings before. I think their definition relates to 4 or more killed within a 24-hour span. But certainly good news, to say the least, that mass killings are way down in 2025. Yeah,
it's certainly something that obviously we've been focused on for a while now at the Reload. It is remarkable that we've seen this drop off in mass shootings and mass killings. And it's good to see the Associated Press take notice of this. Interesting timing, I guess, because we just had another mass, what would qualify, I think, even in the stricter counts as a mass shooting in California recently. And I guess that was kind of the catalyst for this piece, is just mentioning that, yes, this one happened, but these are actually on the downward trend the last really 2 years. If you look at USA Today's count for public mass killings, even if you incorporate ones that aren't shootings, as USA Today does, which I think is actually a reasonable thing to do. We focus quite a lot on shootings, which do make up the majority of mass killings, but they're not the only kind. For instance, the first one this year, then in New Orleans that we saw was mainly perpetrated with a car, and then we had mass killing at a Mormon church where fire was also used in addition to a gun. But we did notice when we were looking into this for the segment that the Violence Project, for whatever reason, James Densley, who's one of the professors that runs it, who's been on our show before, he was quoted in that Associated Press piece. But if you look at the Violence Project's website, they don't appear to be updating their database anymore. Their last shooting that now they have a slightly different methodology, right, than USA Today, but their public mass killings with guns at USA Today should match pretty close to the Violence Project. And for whatever reason, the Violence Project doesn't have any listed mass shootings counted this year. Now, I don't know if that's because there seem to be at least 2 that fit the Violence Project definition. Even if you take the most restrictive view of it, like if you leave out New Orleans, because most of those murders were committed with the car, you're still going to end up with at least 2. And the Violence Project doesn't list those 2. And I'm not quite sure what's going on there, whether they've just stopped updating or not. But either way, certainly the numbers, even going back to last year, where there were only 3 or 4, perhaps, depending on whether you look at Violence Project or USA Today. The instances of mass shootings have declined recently. And it's interestingly, the Associated Press piece, I think is decently insightful. It's not very optimistic about this recent trend, I'll say. And I think that's probably fair. Basically, most of the experts they talk to, like James Allen Fox, who we've also had on the show, who runs the database, don't think this is necessarily the start of a new trend. They think that perhaps it's just what happens when you're dealing with relatively rare events, that sometimes you get more of them and sometimes you get less of them. And it's not necessarily going to be a single factor that you can identify. They kind of talked in the piece about crime and murder in particular. We've discussed this with Jeff Asher on the show a number of times. The murder decline of the 1990s, people still debate why that happened. There isn't necessarily expert consensus on why we saw the murder rate decline during that time. Same thing for, the murder rate increasing during the pandemic and then sharply decreasing the last couple of years to record lows, perhaps this year. Nobody has a full explanation for why that's happening, and I think that's seems to be the case here, at least from these experts that they spoke with. You could probably point to a number of factors. Some of them pointed to like better response from first responders being able to save more people who've been shot. They pointed to the Annunciation Church shooting as an example where that would not count under the Violence Project definition or under the mass killing definition that USA Today uses, because only 2 people were killed, even though many more were injured and shot. But that may be because there was better medical response to that incident than what we had seen in previous years. There may be a better, we may have figured out a better way of responding to these things, and that prevents some of them from reaching the same level of death and destruction as previous attacks. We don't know. And I think, sadly, the general conclusion of the people the AP spoke to is that this may not be a long-term downturn. You may revert back to seeing 6, 7, 8 of these a year instead of 3 or 4. But I would say the good news is, for now, they're down. Just like the murder rate is down, mass shootings are down. And that's good. It's positive. And I'm
Yeah,
glad to
certainly.
see other outlets recognizing that that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a lot of coverage when these things happen, not a lot of coverage when they're
They
not
don't.
happening.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. The last story we want to just briefly touch on comes to us from a local outlet out in Delaware, related to the ongoing saga, the attempt by gun rights groups there to try to get an injunction essentially on that brand new permit to purchase law. I think we talked about this on a previous segment, how a federal district judge, refused to block it before it took effect. So it's been in effect now for a couple weeks. They quickly went to the Third Circuit to try to get an emergency expedited injunction. The Third Circuit has since now denied that request for an expedited injunction. The appeal will still go on, evidently, but that law will remain in effect for the duration.
Yeah. And the permit to purchase laws, these are the ones, obviously a big setback for gun rights advocates in Delaware, and gun owners generally in Delaware who are going to, who don't like the extra requirements attached here. But permit to purchase law challenges, I think, are one of the most interesting in my mind, given where the court has, how it's established the right to carry being on par with the right to bear, the right to bear arms being on par with the right to keep arms. And then also essentially greenlit at least objective permitting requirements for the bearing of arms, which would seem to imply perhaps that they think objective permitting requirements may be also constitutional for the keeping of arms. They haven't actually ruled on this yet, but that is one of the implications of some of the logic that's been laid out in these Supreme Court precedents. So I'd be really interested to follow. This is one area I'm really interested to follow, to see what the Supreme Court actually does with it. If they do go that, they do apply the same standard, if they have some distinction for why permit to purchase is not allowed, but permit to carry is. And there may well be a distinction, but it used to be more that, before Bruin, the court had put ownership on a sort of a higher pedestal than carry, because they hadn't recognized explicitly that carry was, an equally protected aspect, equally protected right. But now that they have, and they've said, well, some carry permits are okay, at least, in dicta, it'll be interesting to see what they think about permit to purchase laws, if and when they actually take one of these cases up. So we will keep an eye on that. But right now we actually have a member segment. I haven't done one in a little while, so we did one this week, and I'm going to toss it over to myself now to take us away. All right, so it's time for one of my favorite segments. We haven't done one in a little while, so it's nice to get back into the routine here. But it's a Reload member segment where we talk to some of the people who make up this community that is the Reload, that is are the people who make this entire operation possible. And with us this week, we have George. Welcome to the show, George.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you doing this. For those who don't know, or we haven't had one of these in a while, so just to reintroduce, we this is one of the perks of being a Reload member, is that you can be on the podcast to do a little background interview, a little get to know you kind of segment. So George, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What do you do? That sort of thing.
I'm from Queens, New York, Astoria, New York, born and raised. I went into the New York City Transit Police Department back in 1986, and started my police career from back then. And it turned out to be a very good public service career, and I was able to get involved in a lot of different cases and try to help the people of the city of New York. And I think the results worked out pretty well. And thank God, I think we became, like, at some point, the biggest, safest city in the world.
Yes, New York had quite a turnaround there in terms of crime, from where it was in like the 60s and 70s, right, into where it is today. So you were part of that. Are you retired now, or are you still serving?
Yeah. Retired 2010. from
Okay.
NYPD.
Great. And what do you do now? What have you done since you retired?
Primarily construction and real estate.
Okay, wonderful. And so what is it that got you into gun news? Were you is it because you served? Was it during your time in the police department or?
No, I was very impressed with your articles about gun restoration rights.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up after I was retired, I through the construction and the carding business, I unfortunately ended up getting involved in a bribery case, and I ended up becoming a nonviolent federal felon.
Mm.
And I served my sentence and everything that they asked me to do. And now, because I'm an avid hunter, uh, the only thing that I really could do is just bow hunting.
Mm.
Um,
So you
and
want
I
to get back into
and I was looking to see
hunting with
if I could,
firearms? Yeah.
what's going on with that. And it
Mhm.
looks like the country is turning around with that, and it looks like they're coming out with a process now to actually get your rights back.
Yeah, that's right. That is one of the major initiatives in the second Trump administration from the DOJ is this rights restoration program. They're trying to restart that, which is a process that's been in federal law. It's part of the statute from the Gun Control Act, but hasn't been used in decades after issues with the previous process made Congress cut off funding. And so now there's this new process that the DOJ is trying to develop. We've written a lot about that, right? About the ins and outs, the details of it over at the Reload. And so that's something that you're personally invested in because you want to get back into hunting with firearms, it sounds like. Okay, interesting. And I assume you also then are following a lot of these legal cases around nonviolent felons trying to get their gun rights back through the court system as well, too, right?
Correct.
Interesting. And so
But it doesn't look, it looks right. It's in the hands of the DOJ, and I compliment your group and the other groups that are promoting it and giving a path back that used to exist, and then through different ATF rules and regulations, they changed all of that. And thank God this administration looks like it's changing all of that now.
yeah, it's certainly been one of the major political fights here surrounding gun rights is, whether this is even sort of a constitutional restriction that's allowed under the Second Amendment is that's been an ongoing fight with cases like Range and Daniels and a bunch of other ones. So, what was it that got you into hunting? Have you been doing that since you were a kid, or?
Since I was a kid, yeah.
Yeah.
Since I was a kid, and I have 4 children, and they all were raised, upstate, with hunting cabin, and they were exposed to nature young, and they're still 2 of them are still active hunters, the 2 boys.
Yeah, and so I imagine that part of this is you'd like to go hunting with them again.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Yes, but it's manageable. But if we can turn that around, it'll be a benefit.
Yeah, yeah. And is there anything in particular in the this proposal that DOJ has put out? Obviously we've profiled what a number of the gun rights groups want to see them change and some of the critiques they have, and then we profiled the gun control groups and what they're saying and what they like to see changed. Is there anything in there that catches your eye as somebody who's directly affected by this kind of process?
Looking at it, I basically look back at the way the country was set up with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and I think that those gentlemen were a lot smarter and better than us, and that we should allow. That's why those documents were set up the way they were. That's why this country became, such a great country that stood out in the whole world. And I think that those documents should be left alone the way that they're originally written. I think they're written for centuries to come and for the continuation of a great country. And those are the documents I think we should kind of be judged by.
And so for you view it as a rights issue. You think that, it sounds like you've served your time, your crime was nonviolent, and you think you should be able to own firearms again. Is that more or less as because of the Second Amendment protections in the Constitution? Is that your point of view on it? Hmm. And so it's obviously this has been kind of a long time coming. It's been since the 1990s since this process was ended by Congress, and now it's restarting again. Do you anticipate you're going to file one of these rights restoration petitions once they're available? I think probably starting next year sometime.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I look to you guys for direction and recommendations, and I'm definitely interested in doing that.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to see what DOJ puts out if they make any major changes based on some of the comments that the various groups have submitted to their Federal Register in the Federal Register to this plan. It's I think more likely than not they probably won't make any major changes. It's probably going to look a lot like what the proposed rule already is, which would be a process where you have to pay $20 and submit certain documents, and there's certain crimes, usually crimes involving violence, that are presumptively denied, and then most other crimes, I guess, sounds like you would be somebody who'd be eligible for what under the process that they've at least proposed to regain your rights. And so, yeah, I mean, we obviously won't know the full details for a little while here, but at least from what you've described, it sounds like you're somebody who's perhaps an ideal candidate for what DOJ is trying to accomplish.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So what besides this, which obviously is very personally affecting, are there any other aspects of our coverage on gun politics or policy or stuff that you find particularly interesting?
Well, the laws that they come out with from the politicians, it looks like, unfortunately, they're just trying to speak to people and pull the wool over their eyes, because since I was in law enforcement, the bad guys are not purchasing their guns from legal sources. They're getting them from my personal experience when I was a young white shield detective working up in Harlem. They were buying them from the Kentucky Fried Chicken drive-through window on 125th Street
Really?
at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
So they're coming in illegally. The weapons. They're not the politicians demanding all of these pistol license revocation programs and not allowing regular citizens to be able to get their weapons. It never sat right with me since I was in law enforcement, because I saw that the guns aren't coming from there. The guns are coming from illegal areas where those laws that are just attacking the average civilian are not stopping them from being able to get these weapons on the street. They really need to go after the illegal way that these guns are coming into the street and handle it that way, and handle bad guys correctly. So this way they'll think twice about doing something like that.
Interesting, right? Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen a number of surveys from, for instance, the Cook County prison system does a survey with the University of Chicago on asking convicts how they obtain their firearms, and usually it sounds that survey backs up some of the anecdotes that you're sharing here in terms of they tend to get them from people who know they're illegally selling them to somebody who can't possess them. So, interesting point. But certainly in New York, there you're on the front lines of a lot of gun policy, especially. I'd say in your view, perhaps, unfortunately, some of the most restrictive and innovative gun control policies that we have. So I imagine that we're going to be writing a lot in the coming months and years about the sort of policies that are being proposed up in New York that may affect you. So, keep that Reload membership, I suppose, and help you stay informed on both the DOJ rights restoration process and the local and state gun control that's coming down the line in New York.
Absolutely.
But hey, we appreciate you just joining us and giving us some insight into your background and what makes you interested in the reporting that we do here at the Reload. Appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And I think that's all we've got for this week. If you guys would like to support the reporting we do here at the Reload and perhaps come and join a member segment yourself, you can head over to thereload.com and pick up a membership today. But that's all we've got for you, and we will see you again real soon.